scary using the chop saw on something this finish, but that's gonna be the best way.
There are 2 ginormous gaps. It's day 40 working on the Griffin sword. We've got our guard forged out. It's normalized. We've got our pommel forged out, pommel nut, and middle spacers. So the fittings are all good to go. Today I want to work on processing this guard down. Right now this area is pretty thick, so I need to mill and surface grind quite a bit of material here, get this all back to nice and square, and then we can move on to preparing the blade for the guard. Once that's done, we'll actually begin to start fitting the guard to the sword blade, and that's gonna be really epic seeing this on there. Before I start working on all that though, I wanna have a little fun. Let's take this awesome, ginormous sword blade out and do some cutting with it. Yeah. Oh, I forget the rope goes all the way through the middle.
Hours later.
Cutting that fruit and piercing those soda bottles was so much fun with the sword. Now it's time to get back to this guard. I've got a ton of grinding and milling and stuff to do on it, and I'm gonna just start doing it right now. I'm getting the sides squared up right now. They're kind of square, but they got forged scale and stuff on them. I just wanted to get back to fresh, clean metal. This will allow me to clamp it the direction I want to in the vise of the mill better.
I'm using my new mill. I say new mill, but I've had it for probably almost 2 years now. But I'm using the mill with a giant 2-inch cutter. My old mill wouldn't handle a cutter so big, but the new one will handle it just fine. I've got it running at a really low RPM, and it takes off some really big chunks of metal, some big chips of metal. With this 2-inch cutter, I can quickly shave down this material on the guard and get down to the thickness that I want. I'm not really concerned right now about shaving off a lot of thickness. I mostly just want to make some nice flat spots. These flat parallel areas I'm milling in will be what I base the rest of the guard off of. So I need to make sure these areas are parallel, flat, and square. Look at that. You can actually see the Damascus pattern from this angle through the cutter as I'm milling on the guard. I think this is one of the coolest shots Josh has ever gotten at the milling machine. It looks like the cutter is running backwards right now. Well, that's just because of the frame rate on the camera, but you can actually see the little tiny shavings of metal coming off the cutter The cutter I'm using has carbide inserts on it. So once the insert's dull, you can loosen the screws and flip them around to another position and have a brand new tooth. And once you use up all the positions, you can just scrap the teeth and put some more in there.
Whoa. You can see the strips peeling off. Whoa, you seeing that? Look, you can see the teeth peeling up strips of metal.
Now that everything's flat, square, and parallel, I switch over to a 1/4-inch carbide bit, and I crank the speed on the milling machine way up to about 4,000 or 4,500. Switching to this smaller bit and cranking the speed up will allow me to leave a nicer finish on the guard, because I've pretty much got everything down to the thickness I want. The 2-inch cutter left a pretty rough finish, and I want to be able to more easily see my scribe lines when we go to lay out the guard fit up, the slot I have to cut, so I wanted to leave a nicer finish using this 1/4-inch bit.
I'm done milling on the guard for now. I've got it milled down to close to the thickness the finished guard will be, and we've got a nice square area here. This guard is pretty much ready to be fit to the sword blade. And speaking of the sword blade, we need to prepare it for the guard fit. The tang needs to be ground down. I need to finalize the width and the thickness of the tang, and also prepare the transition from where the tang and guard fit up all happen. So I've actually got the sword blade all clamped up right here in the milling machine, and I'm gonna start doing some light milling. We're not gonna be removing a ton of material here, just a few thousandths to allow me to fit the guard the way I fit them. Also, check this out. Oh, it makes a really cool sound. Wah, 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 wah. That's moving like 6 inches when I first do that. 4, 5. I just finished milling the 2 flat sides of the tang. Because of the way I want to fit the guard up and the way we have these bevels that run all the way into the guard, I need to mill these 4 angled bevels as well. Normally I don't have to do this because we have a flat ricasso and we just fit the guard up against the flat ricasso. But on this sword, we've got these 4 little angled bevel segments that run all the way into the guard. So I need a little bit of a relief on each one of these segments, only a couple thousandths of an inch. Probably like 2 to 4 thousandths of an inch relief. I'm gonna leave as much material there as I possibly can for strength. I just need a little tiny, tiny stair step right there at the file guide on all 4 of these bevels. In order to mill on these bevels, I need to get the right angle. So I believe I can just press down on this bevel right here to get the right angle, tighten the clamp down, and then this angle up here should be correct. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it needs to be pretty stinking close to perfect. I'm also a little bit concerned and just switched out my mill bit because some of this material up here is kind of floating and this edge is thin and I don't know how much it'll flex and stuff, and I don't want anything weird to happen, like the mill bit to somehow catch on the edge of the sword here and like chip out a chunk of the edge that's irreparable or something like that. So I am a little bit nervous, but that's why I switched out to the new mill bit, and I'm just gonna remove a tiny, tiny amount. Lock. That really terrifies me, I don't know why. Oh, that's convexed. Yeah, that's convex there a little bit, so you're not gonna see it. You're not gonna see it, right? You see that?
That's cool. I think it's on there pretty flat. There's a little spot up there that's not hitting. Let's go like 1/1000th of an inch and see if it dusts it. And I'm not doing it up against the thing right now in case the angle is a little off. We can still... Okay. So after going down about 2/1000ths of an inch, it's hitting the whole surface except for the convex. So that means it's only took 2/1000ths of an inch to get it square. So it's pretty square. Bahoo. I think I'm done milling on the area where the guard fits up for now. I do need to do a little bit of grinding on the ends right here, just to kind of further shape this tang transition. I'm gonna try to leave this nice and wide here at the base, just to leave as much strength as possible because that fuller kind of comes in there, so we're gonna have it widen out to leave a little more material there. I'm gonna shape these little ends on the 2x72 Broadbeck with a kind of worn out 120 grit belt.
It's day 41 of working on the Griffin sword. I ended up deciding to go ahead and take that file guide off. I'm not gonna make any alterations or changes here yet. We'll see how all that plays out when I go to actually fit the guard on. I also spent a lot of time, way more than I'd like to admit, scribing lines on the tang, covering those lines back up with Sharpie or Dykem, and then scribing more lines. I did a layout that was wide tang, I did a really skinny tang, and I think the one we're gonna go with is the Goldilocks just right one. I was getting the tang too skinny or too wide out here. I did a lot of measurements on my sketch, and I think we're going with the one that's in between skinny and wide, so just right, hopefully. Let's head over to the grinder and profile this tang. There's a lot of material we need to take off of the sides, especially down here towards the end. We're gonna put quite a bit of taper on it. I also need to chop off the end of this tang. It's about 2 inches too long, extra material we don't need, and it's time to get rid of it because we're gonna be surface grinding this later, and having this extra long tang is just gonna make things extra more difficult.
Scary using the chop saw on something this finished, but that's gonna be the best way. Can't use the bandsaw, it's too hard.
Yeah, that definitely felt strange. Chop sawing on this blade. Well, that cut off a good, I don't know, ounce and a half right there. Okay, profile, profile, profile. I finished cleaning up the shape and profile of the tang. The next thing I need to do is clean up the thickness of it. Right now, the tang is a little bit thicker than it needs to be. I'm gonna surface grind it down until we get to this milling machine mark here. That's about 5/1000ths below the surface of the blade. Need to get the whole tang down to that, and I'll probably add just a little bit of taper to the blade too. Tang, add a little bit of taper to the tang. I just finished surface grinding the sides of the tang down. We can take some measurements now and kind of get an idea for how thick everything is. So I'm gonna measure the blade right here at the thickest point, right before the little relief I made for the guard fit up. Relief. So I started out with my blade being a 1/4 inch, which is 250 thousandths. Right here you can see it's right around that 240 thousandths mark. So by the time I ground in my fuller, did all the edge bevel grinding and stuff, we lost about 10 more thousandths. I'm actually very happy with that, that's good. So we'll measure the blade right here where I started surface grinding. See how thick this tang is here. Looks like it's about 216, 217. And then we can see how much taper I put on the tang. If I measure all the way down here, it looks like it's about 195 thousandths. So we've got a good little bit of taper, not a ton. I still wanted to leave the tang with some material left in it. It's day 44 working on the Griffin sword. I spent a little over a day and a half working on this practice piece. I wanted to make sure that I didn't mess up the actual guard fit, because it took a lot of time to get this guard all forged out and it's looking really good, so I don't want to mess it up at all. I went ahead and just cut a little chunk of mild steel off, and this represents just that little section there where the guard's going to fit up. And then I spent all that time trying to get this to fit to the sword blade. This guard fit up is a lot more complicated than most of the guard fit ups I do, because most of the guard fit ups I do, you have a nice rectangular ricasso that you're fitting up to. But this one, we're actually fitting up to these angled bevels on the sides. So much more tricky to fit the guard, much more tricky to mill. Everything's more tricky about this. On top of all that, these little angled sections right here where the bevels fit into the guard, those grooves cannot go all the way through the guard. Because if they went all the way through the guard, you'd have these wide grooves back here and the handle wouldn't actually be wide enough to hide those. So you'd have these grooves showing up on the back side of the guard that the handle wasn't covering up at all. So because of that, they can only go in a certain distance and then they have to stop, which makes everything more tricky. Not more tricky to mill, but more tricky because after you're done milling, you can't get in there and easily file. See, it's real easy to file something when you can stick your file through the groove and work on it that way. But if the groove doesn't go all the way through, you can only move your file like this much, so it's just more difficult and not something I'm used to working on. So that's why I wanted to do this practice piece. The practice piece went really well. It took me a lot of time. Hopefully we can move a little quicker now since I won't be as experimenting with things as much on the actual guard. I've actually got this all ready to chuck up in the milling machine. I've got some Dykem on here and a whole bunch of layout lines. In fact, I'm not even sure. What do you think? Are there enough layout lines on there? Let's just count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15? You think that's enough layout lines for a guard? I hope it's enough, because there's not much more room on here for more. And hopefully I don't get confused which lines go to what and make the groove the wrong shape. Lots of layout lines. Hopefully there's enough there. Let's chuck this thing up in the milling machine and start cutting that main rectangular groove on the inside. To the milling machine. Got the guard all clamped up. I used a little tiny point to get the mill all lined up with my layout lines. I've got a 3/16 inch carbide cutter in here. I'm gonna start cutting out that rectangular slot.
I've got the speed cranked up on the mill to like 4,500 RPM. There is a lot of material to remove here. This guard is a little over a 1/2 inch thick and I'm taking 30 thousandths of an inch away at a time, so I have to make a lot of passes. Also keep in mind this is a Damascus high carbon steel guard. It's not hardened, but it's still a lot harder than milling through something like mild steel. Power-wise, the mill can handle it no problem at all. It does end up dulling this bit a little bit by the time I make it all the way through the 1/2 inch thick guard though. Once I get the 3/16 inch slot all the way through the guard, I can then widen the slot out a little bit. My tang at the thickest area is over 3/16, but less than 1/4. So I can just use the side of the 3/16 bit to widen the groove out to whatever width I want.
So I just finished milling out the center rectangular area, and I used some smaller bits to just remove some of that bulk material in the tapered areas, but I have not matched the angle of the tapers yet on the sides. That's actually what we're gonna do next. Right here, I set up a rotary vise inside of my regular vise. Normally you would mount this rotary vise like on the table somewhere else, but since I'm just using it for such a small task, I found it's really easy to mount it up inside of the regular vise I use. I did have to take the jaws off of the vise though in order for it to open up wide enough to receive this whole unit. I also spent a little bit of time getting this all tooled up in here, getting it clamped down tightly. Got a couple bolts here holding these clamps down, and I had to put a shim underneath the guard here because of the way it's shaped. These rough portions here were gonna hit on this, so it had to be shimmed up a little bit. Made it all a little bit trickier to hold down. What's really cool about this rotary vise, or this rotary tool, is that I can turn it right here and change the angle, which we can't really change the angle very easily when it's in the fixed vise. So we've got the center milled out here. This is pretty good. We've got some of the material milled out on the ends, but we need to match the angle of those bevels here on these little end bits. So what I'm gonna end up doing is using this little point in the milling machine. I'm gonna line that point up with these angled lines that I have on here. These angled lines represent the edge bevels of the sword, and that's the angle we need to match on the ends for this. So I can just keep tweaking this, get it just the right angle until that little point comes down centered right here on one end of the angled line and then down here on the other end. And if it's off a little bit, I can just change the angle. Once that's done, I'm gonna mill out this little bit of material here on the end, and hopefully it'll match the angle that the scribe line is going on. That's just plus or minus a little bit. It doesn't need to be perfect. I just need to get it close to the same angle as these lines. We're gonna do more work later on as I fit this guard that will get it perfect. Maybe I can try to split the difference about halfway. Oh. Oui, oui. I'm done lining that small point up with one of the angles here. The next thing we need to do is switch to this 3/32 inch mill bit, but we need to move the milling machine or the workpiece over. Because right now, if I started milling, it would mill right down the center of that scribe line. Well, I want to move so the milling machine bit is just cutting to one side of the scribe line. I don't want to cut it down the middle, otherwise it would completely ruin the guard fit. So we need to take half the thickness of this and move over. So half the thickness of this would be 0.04685. I'm gonna move over a little bit extra, so I'm gonna move over like 48 thousandths. That would give me just a little over an extra thousandths of wiggle room, which doesn't sound like a lot, but I already have a little bit of wiggle room built into my scribe lines too. So that means overall I'm giving myself more than a thousandth. I'm just adding on an extra thousandth here just to keep the numbers simple.
Right now I'm using a 3/32 inch carbide end mill to cut away some of that material that's in the tapered bevel area. I want to get as much of this material removed as I can without accidentally taking out too much. Because remember, if I cut too much in any of these places, I might end up with some horrible gaps between my blade fit and my guard fit. I've got the guard all mounted up on an angle though, using a rotary vise, and I can go in there and pretty much match the angle of my scribe lines and use this 3/32 inch carbide bit to cut away that material. The 3/32 inch bit will get most everything. It won't get the very, very end. So I can go in there with a smaller bit or just deal with that later. I'm not sure what I'm doing yet.
So there's one of those angled cuts done. Now I just need to repeat that process 3 more times. Use the point to make sure it's lined up with the scribe line. Chuck up the 3/32 bit, move over 48 thousandths of an inch, and then mill down 300 thousandths deep. After a long, long time at the milling machine, I finally am done milling out the slot for the guard to fit up to the blade. That took quite a bit of time, especially doing those angled cuts, getting the angle just right, getting it all set up, and then slowly cutting everything. I didn't want to accidentally break a bit off down in there and have it make a big old giant gouge or something in my guard and ruin it. So I took my time, went really slow. It looks really good. Let's see how far up onto the blade it actually fits. I haven't done any filing or fitting to this besides just, it's fresh off the mill, hot off the press. Oh, that's looking really good. That's looking really good. It goes right up to where that tang is flared out. I think we can go ahead and start hammering this on. I'm gonna fit this like I do my normal guards, where I hammer it on and then go see where the tang and the blade is rubbing, and then remove material to get it to fit further and further. And we're actually gonna be inlaying the blade into the guard. The blade will actually go into it probably about 10 thousandths of an inch or so, maybe 20. Also, you might notice I've got some tape on here. That was from when I did the test piece. That's so I can clamp this up in the clamp it in the vise tightly while I take a little pipe that I smashed down flat and use it as a punch to punch this guard on. Before I hammer this though, coffee break. Oh, that's good. Through the vise. I need to keep it on a little bit of an angle here. That way I can clamp onto more of the blade without the blade hitting on the vise up underneath there. That'd be really bad. We don't want the blade edge to be banging on the vise. Want it nice and tight too. So I'm using a cheater bar to tighten it up real tight. I have like 20, 30 layers of tape on there, and we've got the leather. So hopefully the jaws of the vise won't cut through into the finished blade. Well, I say finished, but it's not completely finished, but for our purpose, it might as well be. Here's my little hammer punch. This is just a piece of pipe that I flattened on the 40-ton hydraulic press. Welded a metal end cap to it. So now I just want to kind of hammer it on there till it stops, and then we'll be able to take the guard off and see where the guard's rubbing and remove material where it's rubbing too hard. Okay, I've gone about as far as I dare go. Now we can take it off and actually take a look at this fit up and see how everything's looking here. So that's looking pretty good as far as I can tell. Kind of disconcerting that it hammered on so far on the first try. That's either a good sign that I milled it even closer, or a bad sign that I maybe milled it too far and there's gonna be gaps. Kind of hard to tell right now. For now, I wanna go ahead and take this guard off. So we'll put a little leather on here. And the way we take it off is just clamp it up in there and then hit on the end of the tang. It's on there pretty good. This is a 2-pound hammer. I'm not swinging it real hard, but as I get the fit closer and closer to being done, I'll make it fit a little bit looser because we don't want to have to hammer it on that hard every time during this build. I need to go mark down the orientation of this, make some kind of mark on the blade and the guard so I don't put it on the wrong way. Because at this point, things are probably not perfectly symmetrical, and I don't want to accidentally put this on the wrong way next time I go to put it together and then end up with gaps. So now if we look down inside the guard, we can see some shiny places where the tang of the blade is rubbing on the inside. And I'm gonna take this guard in now to my microscope and my high-speed dental burr that turns at 320,000 RPM. And I'm gonna use that little tiny carbide burr to remove some of that material down in there. I won't remove the material close to the edge, but I'll remove some further down inside the guard just so it can fit in there better. There's some material over here I can see needs removed. Once we remove a little bit of that material, leaving the prevailing edge here alone, it'll allow that guard to fit on further and further. We want to be very careful right around the edge though. If I accidentally cut away some material here, we might end up with like a little gap between the blade and the guard fit up.
Are you tired of wasting valuable time searching for the tools and materials I use? I understand. Introducing the Mastersmith's Toolkit. It's a downloadable PDF that brings together all the links I use in one convenient place. Imagine having instant access to all the resources I use right at your fingertips. The best part is, the Mastersmith's Toolkit is absolutely free. That's right, sign up today and have instant access to all the tools and materials I use without spending a dime. So click the link in the description and sign up today.
I just finished the first cycle of using the carbide high-speed dental burr. Now I'm just gonna slam it back onto the blade, hopefully leave some new marks, and repeat that process over and over and over again, however many times it takes to get this guard to fit. I can't really tell quite yet if I milled away too much material in any of these places. I'm gonna keep repeating that process over and over again. Hopefully everything will come out good and I'll be able to get this guard fit up right. If not, I'll have to scrap this thing and start over. We have maybe just enough material to start another guard. I do not want to do that though, because I spent so much time milling on this, and I spent a lot of time forging it and getting it all squared up and everything too.
346 minutes later.
I'm still working on fitting this guard. I have spent almost the entire day fitting this guard. Let's see how it fits now. That's about perfect. I want a nice snug fit to where I have to tap it on with a hammer, but not enough to where I have to really wail on it. There are two ginormous gaps. One right here near the fuller, and another one right here. I don't know if you can see these. These are some big, like 1/8 inch gaps. Probably some of the biggest guard gaps I've ever had. I don't know if that's gonna work, but besides those, the entire guard fits perfectly. It looks really, really good. My goal is to design the guard to make it look like the fuller just keeps on going throughout the tang. So I had the guard fit up, stop right where the fuller starts to round off. And if you look down in there, it's just like a dark, deep black hole. You can't see anything. You can't see the end of the fuller or anything at all. So it looks exactly the way I wanted it to. I've got my little carbide tipped hammer here, made by my friend Corin in Australia. Not very heavy at all. I'm just gonna hold the guard with my hand. It's kind of awkward. I've got the blade here. I don't want the blade to hit the ground. That's it. It's tight enough that you still need to use a hammer to put the guard on and off, which is what I want. That way it's nice and tight. There's no vibrations or anything loose, no gaps. At the same time, it's not tight enough to where I have to really wail on it, because later on, once we get the end of this tang threaded and stuff, we're not gonna wanna be hitting on the end of the threaded tang real hard, but that's just the right tension. And it'll probably loosen up just a little bit as I continue fitting it onto the blade on and off as I go. I also wanted to show you how I had to swell out the back of the guard a little bit. I had to swell out one side, kind of squish the metal over in order to kind of get my guard to sit at a little bit different angle. I also ended up milling this flat spot on the guard at a slightly different angle too. So those two things together made it so I was able to get everything nice and square with the blade. I'm just gonna take my little test piece guard here, the one that I tested on before I actually fit the real thing, and show you exactly how I swelled that metal on one side of the back of the guard. I've just got a nice flat block of Damascus steel here, nice little chunk. I was using that as my, my anvil. And then I took this small punch, and basically just tried to flare out the metal on one side of the guard. I'm gonna show you exactly what I did on the real thing here. So that's just one little section of it. I ended up going all the way across the back of my guard on the real thing there. Doing that along the back of the guard actually moved enough metal to where you could kind of swell out that one side of the guard about 1/8 of an inch deep, maybe a little bit less than that. So it's not just on the very surface. It goes down in there enough with how hard I was hitting it, enough to where it helped that guard just sit at a little bit different angle. Once I got that done, I went ahead and just milled a little bit of an angle on the guard on one side. I just put a piece of tape on there and just had the guard sit on a little bit of an angle when I milled on it. And that, in combination with doing this little punching swelling on one side, got it to where I finally got this thing nice and square on the blade. The reason you don't see any of those little punch marks on here is because through the milling process, getting everything all squared back up, I shaved off a few extra thousandths and just got rid of those little grooves, because I did not like the way those looked. And even though they were gonna be inside the handle fit up and you were never gonna see them, I didn't want them on there just for my own personal reasons, because I wanted the inside to look nice too. The next thing I need to do on the guard is actually get it profiled. So I'm gonna go clean up the sides of the guard here so I can do layout lines and stuff, because right now there's just scale and nasty stuff on here. I can't accurately add any layout lines. I'm gonna get all this cleaned up, then we'll be able to add layout lines, and I'm gonna focus after that just on getting the profile of the guard cleaned up. So that means all these edges, get the end the right length, get it shaped the right way, and get these areas here shaped the right way that they need to be. I'm not gonna be shaping down all this way though. I'm just gonna grind the scale off and then leave it there for now. I don't shape this dimension of the guard until after the handle is fit up and everything, because right now I still am not exactly sure how wide the handle is gonna be, so I don't wanna go ahead and commit to making this guard a certain width, because I might make it too skinny or something for the actual handle and end up with some really big problems. So I like to get my whole handle fit up and then do all the shaping in this dimension. Does that make sense? I hope that makes lots of sense. To the grinder! It's day 47 of working on the Griffin sword. I'm profiling the guard, and the first thing I need to do is get the ends of this cut off to the right length. Right now they're about a 1/4 inch too long. I've already taken the liberty of adding some scribe lines, so you don't have to sit here and look at me like measuring and like scratching a line and remeasuring. So we've got a couple scribe lines here. I'm gonna rough off these real quick on the grinder, just the ends, and then I'm gonna chuck this up in the milling machine and we're gonna mill off equal amounts, or get both ends equal length. I have a nice center line here to go by, so in the milling machine I can get it exact. I'm gonna base everything off of this center line I made. To the grinder! No, you don't need to do that again.
I'm using a pretty worn out 36 grit belt on the 2x72 grinder. In fact, it may be a little too worn out because it's not grinding away this material very quickly at all. I know there's a lot of sparks, but hardly any material's getting removed. So I think once I get this side ground, I'm gonna go ahead and switch the belt out to one that's a little less used, but still used for the other end, because I've got about a 1/4 inch to grind off that, and I want it to go a little bit quicker at least.
I've got the ends of these ground off a little bit just to remove that bulk of excess material. Next, I'm gonna chuck this up in the milling machine, and then I'm gonna center the milling machine up on this center line here. Then I can use the digital readout to just move over a certain distance, shave off some material, move over a certain distance the other way, and shave off the same, and that way the ends will be the same length.
Once I've got the guard all mounted up in the milling machine, all I have to do is line up the very center of the guard with the milling machine, hit 0 on my digital readout, and then move to one end of the guard, shave it off clean, and wherever I stop milling at, once that end is clean, I can just take note of that number, and then go to the other end of the guard, and in the negative of that same number, mill off until I hit the exact same number. And then I know that both ends of the quillion are exactly the same length from that scribe line. That sounded kind of complicated, but it's really not, I promise. I'm just milling equal distances away from the center line and getting everything nice and square on the ends of the guard while I'm at it. You can see here the guards actually become quite magnetic. There are hundreds of little tiny burrs sticking to the guard, and it looks like a few are sticking to the chuck as well. I started out with a large 1/2 inch bit that was made from high-speed steel, but it was pretty dull and wasn't cutting the material away very nicely. So I switched it down to a 1/4 inch carbide bit that was much, much sharper, and it's doing a really good job of shaving off this material on the end of the guard. Something I noticed about using the side of a mill bit like this is that it creates these really long, super thin and splintery shards of metal. These things are the worst splinters you've ever gotten in your life. They are razor sharp, very skinny, and they have a tendency of wanting to just poke right through your skin and into your fingers. They are not fun at all. So once I'm done milling the ends of the guard, I'm gonna try to blow off the area, get these burrs out of here so I don't get them all over in my hand. This is definitely a reason why you don't want to walk around in my shop with no shoes on or anything either, because even after the floor is swept and vacuumed, there might be some of these little tiny nasty burrs just hanging out.
I got the ends of the guard shaved off. The next thing we need to focus on is grinding down or milling down these areas. And I've been wrapping my brain around it a bunch, and I think the best way to do this is, or maybe not the best way, but the way I want to do it is actually going to be to mill it down. I would love it if I could get these areas nice and flat and square to the rest of the guard. The solution I came up with in order to mill this is to actually take this little angle finder from back when I used to work on the job site with Dad. We would use this for like angles and stuff on houses, and I can square this up to the guard. A little bit janky, get it all squared up on here, and then I sat there and messed with the angle until I got it as close to matching the angle on the quillions of the guard here as I could possibly get it. The next step that I did was I went ahead and made this little wedge shaped thing. I kind of tried to just mimic the angle that I came up with here, milled it nice and flat. It's got a taper to it, and this taper should be the same as the angle change on the guard. I'm gonna use this like a parallel, set this in the milling machine vise, and then set the guard on top of it in the little flat area here, and it should make it so this angle right here matches what I've got on my sketch, and we can just go in and mill this material away. And then when we want to do the other side, flip it around and do the same over here. Another reason I decided to go the milling route is because I thought if I made this little wedge, I should be able to get all 4 of these milled exactly the same if the plan comes out right. Let's chuck this up in the mill and get started. So the way this works, or at least I hope it works, is I've got some parallels in here. We stick our little angled block in here to one side, pushing it up against the one side of the vise here. I don't want this to sit in here all crooked. Since we're working with angles, if you start changing things around and things might compound out of hand and create a bunch of problems. And then we need to set this on the flat area on the back side of the guard. Now I'm gonna come in here and mill this material down. I should get to this flat area right here about the same time that I get to my, my little layout scribe line on the sides of the guard, approximately. Little burr forming right there on the side. Oh, it broke off. That was a new one. Oh, it broke off. I'm getting ready to do the fine milling, the final passes with a small cutter, and I'm just making sure that everything's seated properly before we continue, just in case all that pressure pushed this piece down or anything, but it seems like it's sitting nicely still. Oh, that's hot too. It's getting dull. I left a really shiny finish. Kind of makes me wonder if it's getting dull. I'm using a 1/4 inch bit to leave a finer finish and to really get up in here right where this angle change happens. I'm gonna get this angle change to be as tiny of a ledge as I can get it. I gotta run it right up in that corner though. If I run a little too far towards me, I'll leave a groove in this, this flat area where the guard fits up.
Wow. Feels really good right there. Just feeling for that transition change. See if I can feel metal sticking up. I want it to be almost seamless right there.
I use my 3/4 inch cutter to rough away most of the material here. Right now though, I've got it switched up to a 1/4 inch cutter, turning at a much higher RPM. And just like earlier, I'm doing this so to leave a little bit finer of a finish, because I'll probably end up hand sanding from this stage on the profile of the guard. And with my 3/4 inch cutter, I would have to hand sand with like 36 grit in order to get the marks out. But with this 1/4 inch cutter, turning at a high speed, it's leaving a finish that's nice enough that I can probably start out hand sanding with something like 220 or maybe 320 grit sandpaper. The less sanding I have to do on these surfaces, the better, because anytime you're hand sanding things, it's very easy to roll over and round corners, and when you're trying to keep everything really crisp, you want to do less hand sanding rather than more hand sanding.
That looks really good. I milled this down until I can't even feel with my fingernail where that angle change happens. There's almost no bump there. And I had some layout on here that I was following. The layout is just for reference. I'm not following it exactly. And that came out to be just about the perfect angle. I'm almost right in the corner of the two little lines I made right here, which is what I wanted. I'm gonna take this out, clean up this area right around the vise here just to make sure there's not little chips on top of my little angled piece, and do the same thing to this side. Hopefully that little wedge-shaped piece that I made will make it so all 4 of these cuts that I have to make will leave everything nice and consistent.
20 minutes later.
I just finished milling the ends of the guard. They came out beautiful. I'm gonna be done profiling this for now. We do need to round the ends, but I decided to go ahead and just leave the ends square for now, because later on when I do the piercings and stuff in the guard, it might be handy to have the ends square because I can lay it on my granite surface here and scribe lines and stuff. And if I round those ends over, I won't be able to easily do things like that. One of the next things to do is actually to fit the handle onto this massive blade. But I'll save that for next time. I will see you in the next video. May the forge be with you. Bye-bye!